But we're not going to all get ahead of each other on the employment line by all getting.
And that's what I'm saying.
Why would a group of liberal intellectuals or politicians or media stars or whatever, why would they sit around and decide to dismember or dilute the criminal justice system if they thought in advance that it would raise the amount of criminality?
Oh, they didn't think that, but the point is,
They just thought wrongly that it would help.
yes, but it would also give them an enormously larger role than they had before. I mean, a judge who just sits there and applies the laws that have been passed by the legislature has a very minor role. But if he takes the expansive judicial activist role, then of course he's on the leading edge, and he can look for the hosannas and all the rest of it from the sideline.
How does this play out in the realm of something else you have written about, which is affirmative action?
Exactly the same
How does
thing.
that process? What's the 1, 2, 3, 4 on that?
I haven't worked it out like that, but certainly there is no interest whatever in finding out empirically whether things have been made better or worse for minorities as a result of this program.
So he's talking about affirmative action now. If you want to say something like this to me 2-3 years ago, there would be no discussion. I'm not gonna hold you. Like, you hate affirmative action? How? That's what, like, I would be like, how? But as I started to get a little older and I'm starting to see life play out, he has a point. I'm not gonna say he's 100% right yet. I haven't finished the video, but he has a point. Affirmative action in 2023, it can get a lot worse for minorities using it. The only reason I'm saying this is because affirmative action was a corrective policy. What does that mean? That as affirmative action was being put into place, it was to correct past wrongdoings of a different race or different societal standards. That's why affirmative action was put into place. So what does this mean? That as affirmative action was starting to be implemented more into society, it was used to correct things. But let's say you get to a point where correction is no longer needed, or it's not needed as much. The reason that it could be a problem is because if affirmative action is just as strong today as it was during the corrective policies, it's going to build a lot of resentment in other races who do not benefit, or other groups of people who do not benefit from this corrective policy. Because they look at it as, oh, it's hurting me now. It's a corrective policy, whereas in today's society, we don't need correction. So that's why when you have affirmative action in place, it can hurt a minority more than benefit it to an extent, because as a correction, it implies that correction is needed. But if correction is no longer needed, why do you need affirmative action? So it's stripped away. But then it gets kind of sticky, because you're going to start stripping away other things and other things and other things. And then it's going to all boil back down to the original state, because you're just taking away all the corrective policies. So when I say it hurts minorities to an extent, is that it just builds a lot of resentment, and it just, to a point, isn't needed as much as it was, and then all the corrective policies are just taken away. So a few years ago, I may not have agreed with him too much, but as I'm starting to get a little older, I'm starting to see his point a little more.
And in fact, if you bring them up evidence, they'll say, but things would have been even worse had we not done this. Similarly with the war on poverty, you can show how dependency on government was going down, poverty was going down before this program was ever put in. And within a few years, dependence on government was going up. And after a few more years, the absolute number of people in poverty was going up.
Yeah, I read that in your book, but the absolute number of poverty is not the data. The relevant data would be the rate of poverty. And the rate of poverty, in fact, in the 1970s, I worked for...
Yeah, man, and I'm not going to talk too much because I just talked a lot, but he's right. Like, you start to depend on it more. Because, like, when that court case just happened and they were talking about getting rid of affirmative action in schools and all that stuff, I had a few people say that, oh, how am I going to get into this program now that affirmative action is gone? And they were joking, because they were like extremely smart people, but all jokes have like true things in them. So the reason I brought that up is because when you start to depend on something too heavily, it kind of becomes like a crutch in your life. Instead of working as hard as you could work, you're just working enough to get to that level, to get to that. So instead of working super, super hard to get what you want, you're just working hard enough to where you can fit into this crutch. And that's something I've noticed when it comes to, I guess, affirmative action, that it kind of hinders potential in a lot of people. Not saying it's wrong or right, but that's just something that I've noticed being a scholar. And I'm not trying to be like, oh, I hate affirmative action. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I've noticed it become a crutch, and we don't need it as a crutch. It hinders us in a way.
President Johnson, so we have to establish
Yes.
there. So I mean, the line we took was that during the 1960s, during the Kennedy Johnson administration, poverty did in fact go down sharply. And then the rate since then, not the absolute number because the country has grown larger, the rate has sort of bounced around at about flat, somewhere between 12 and 15%.
Yes, but don't forget, this was sold to the country, not on the grounds that if you transferred money from A to B, that B would have more money. That was not the argument. The argument was that dependency would be reduced, that you would, quote, invest in people, as Bill Clinton is now saying, now that people have forgotten what was said in the 60s. This will then, you give them job training and all those kinds of things, parenting skills, the whole bit. And this will then be an investment that will pay off in the future because there'll be fewer people dependent upon the government than there were before. And I go through a great number of people from John F. Kennedy to Lyndon Johnson, the New York Times, again, all the usual suspects. Said all these things.
Lyndon Johnson was not a usual suspect, Tom.
Well, he was the primary suspect. All right. But the fact is that was never tested. And when there were all these wonderful retrospectives held down in Texas and other places about this, the first order of business is to evade the criterion that they themselves set up when they set this out. And so no matter what happens, if it's a failure by the original criterion, then we just find another criterion by which it will be a success.
Well, let's just examine that for a minute. I have a friend of mine from those old White House days was listening to, again, Gingrich shortly after we had this great Republican Revolution in 1994. A great meaning huge, not necessarily wonderful. We shall see about that. And he kept hearing Newt Gingrich use the word opportunity. This conservative opportunity society, we have to provide opportunity. And I was talking to him, I said, you know, Gingrich uses that word opportunity almost as much as Johnson did, which is what you're saying, that was the rhetoric. It was called the OEO, was the Office of Economic Opportunity. Yes. That's what it was. Now, so if liberals were talking about opportunity, and now conservatives are talking about opportunity, and I'm sure you're for opportunity.
All God's children got opportunity.
All God's children got opportunity. So what is your problem that liberals said we ought to create programs for opportunity? And in point of fact, I mean, I won't say play devil's advocate.
Here's the thing. When you say we have to create programs for opportunity, that saying implies that there's a lack of opportunity. And the reason that this can be so detrimental to minority youth, because I'm talking about the youth, because that's like the future, is because when they hear that we need to create opportunity, what they hear is there is no opportunity right now. So when you're hearing that and you're like, oh, well, they took away the opportunity I had, I'm not going to achieve now. That's how kids think. So this is why stuff like this is like super important to discuss, super important to learn about.
I mean, a lot of the things that came out of the Great Society, I mean, building all those junior colleges and community colleges.
Oh, I would disagree entirely. I think it was a tragedy of the first magnitude.
That was a tragedy.
Yes.
Why is that a tragedy?
You have millions of people who have absolutely no desire for an education, using up billions of dollars of the taxpayers' money, and not only not getting an education themselves, making it more difficult to give an education to those people who came to college with an idea of getting one.
Now, you say they have no desire for an education. I mean, nobody is herding them into these community colleges and into the junior colleges and into the state universities. I mean, they have a desire, obviously.
No, they do not, obviously, because lots of things go on in those places that are not education. I mean, where else can you find so many young people of the same age and opposite sex in one place? A nice, convenient place to be. But anyone who is taught in a lot of these places, this ferocious desire for education as such is not terribly visible. And I taught at places where we've gotten, the upper 10, 15% of students. I mean, UCLA and whatnot. Neither I nor my colleagues found this great desire for education as such. They wanted to be in ivy-covered buildings for 4 years in order to get more money when they graduate and have a good time while they're there.
So you think the great American ideal, which has really been shared by both parties and both ideologies over recent decades, to allow more people to get into higher education, that is a bankrupt idea?
Oh, to allow is one thing, but to subsidize people at enormous cost with no real sign that this is producing what we intend to produce.
When you say
And then being a modern student in these services, it actually makes it worse for the ones who are serious about education. And what do I mean by it makes it worse? There's this stigma that goes around. It's called the American dream, that if you go to college, get a 4-year degree, and do everything you're supposed to do, you're going to get the life that you want. But since more people are going to school, since it's easier to go to school now, it hurts those ones who are actually super serious about their stuff, because they are not getting the opportunities. Because society makes it easier. They have these they're subsidizing schooling now. So it's like it's not even that impressive if you're getting a degree now. And that's what I mean by it hurts people. Because the ones who are really working hard, who really had to grind to be in school, grind to get there, work their way through, really do everything they did right, they're in the same schools as the people who, they're just there to be there. They're just there. They're in the same schools, and that's what makes it wrong. Like lowering standards, it doesn't help anyone. You may think it does. Like, of course, degree rates are going up, but opportunities are going down.
Subsidized. You talk about a junior college, a community college. I guess that's subsidized. It's below cost tuition, but it does allow kids who do not have the money to go to Amherst or wherever to start a college education.
People did that before the Great Society. I did it before the Great Society. My whole generation did it before the Great Society.
You are saying that the great humanitarian political impulses of the 1960s have been almost without exception bad.
Well, there have been some good ones, but I'm saying that the assumption that on the education front, I would defy you to find a large number of people who've actually taught these students who really think that they're out there thirsting for knowledge.
Well,
if you think,
suppose they are thirsting for a better job, and we've set up a society where you have to be credentialed with a certain amount of college, so aren't they able to get a better job?
No,
because
this
of their
is the fallacy of composition. If one person stands up in the stadium, he sees the game better, but if they all stand up, they don't all see the game better. As long as, if you have a degree and the other guy doesn't, then you get ahead of him in the employment line. But we're not going to all get ahead of each other in the employment line by all getting...
And that's what I'm saying. One thing they really messed up at is that they made it easier to go to college. They made college easier to get into. They subsidized colleges. Whereas they should have made it so that even if you don't have the desire to go to college and get a higher education, you still have the possibility of achieving a good life. That's what should have been done. But instead, you just say, okay, it's easier for everyone to go to college. So now you're sending kids to college who have no desire of being there, who have no intention of doing anything required, who are just getting the loans just to get them, who are going to the school just to be here, and they're still graduating. So now you have more degrees, college prices are going up because more people are going, and it's hurting the people who actually have a real desire to get to be there. Like he said, if one person stands up in the stadium, they can see better. But if everyone stands up, nobody can see. That's what's happening. Instead of making it easier to go to college and easier to graduate from college, you should have just made it so that even if you don't go to college, you still have an opportunity to have a good life. That's what should have been happening. Because there's kids there who have no intention of, who have no purpose of being there. They shouldn't be there. Let's be honest. Some people should not be in college. And it's not a problem. I'm not saying you have to go. It's just not the path they have. So instead of making a life where you have to go to college to be successful, it should have been a life that even if your brain isn't telling you to be here, you still have opportunity to achieve what you want to achieve. That's what should have been pushed rather than the subsidizing of colleges.
Degrees.
So this whole idea that I guess again both liberals and conservatives are saying is that at this particular moment, 1995, we have to get more people into the education system because that's the way to compete. And we look at the data and we see that the people with more education are earning more money than ever before relative to the people with less education. That's all a fallacy of everybody standing up in the stadium.
People who fly on the Concorde, kids who've flown on the Concorde undoubtedly will make more money than kids who've only gone on buses. That does not mean if we put a lot of people on the Concorde, we're going to raise the national income.
Yep.
But
It's not happening.
Increase the revenues of the Concorde.
Yes, and which they desperately need, of course.
Right.
But that's another story.
All right, now, and just to review the bidding, you date the full-blown nature of this this situation sort of in the 1960s. Is that right?
Yes.
I mean, that's, everyone on the conservative side Genesis is mid-1960s. That's when the world started. I mean, and I'm not arguing with that.
Well, not necessarily. I would say the fall in the garden.
Right. Okay. All right. Now, since the 1960s. The United States of America has won the Cold War, while a lot of people, including mostly conservatives, were saying, "Oh, America's lost its nerve," and because we're
I don't think that was mostly conservatives.
Well, I recall an issue of the public interest in the mid-1970s saying, "Has America lost its nerve?" A whole bunch of conservatives saying, "Oh my God, it's terrible."
Well, this is Jimmy Carter's era.
Well, maybe that's right. Since this terrible event 30 years ago, when the 60s dropped upon us, we've won the Cold War. We've continued to grow in affluence and professional skills. We have absorbed about 20 million immigrants. We are the wealthiest, freest country in the history of the world. You would agree with all of that, roughly.
Well, I disagree entirely with your base period.
It's your base period.
None of these
You
things
established in 1960s.
No. I'm saying all those things that you talk about began long before the 1960s. They faltered to a great extent under Jimmy Carter. They were resumed with renewed vigor in the 1980s under an entirely different kind of vision.
You look pissed.
But I'm talking about the social decline of the country, because the social decline is all the more striking because here is a country that is prosperous. You can't blame the crime rate on the fact that there's more poverty. There's less poverty. There's more affluence. It's not due to foreigners because, as you say, we've won the Cold War. All the normal things that you might blame all this on aren't there. It's not because of diseases, because science has conquered more diseases. It's all because of self-inflicted wounds. And I'm saying these are the people who inflicted those wounds, and this is why we shouldn't listen to them anymore.
Bro, this dude is intelligent, bro. He's intelligent. I'm gonna have to look at some of the stuff. But if y'all have any suggestions, let me know in the comments. LFR Jojo, and I'll see y'all.